Good morning all. Live streaming is now on and I welcome you to the 8:60 Water, Waste and Energy Committee meeting of the 14th of October 2025 and I declare the meeting open at 9:06 a.m. Big welcome to our committee members, our visiting councillors and of course our hard-working city officers and chamber staff. Just a reminder that our meetings are open to the public and are live streamed and we also welcome those joining us from home. So starting off with item 1, attendance and apologies. I have 2 apologies to move this morning. One for Councillor Hammel, who is out of the city on business. Do I have a mover for Councillor Hammel's apology? Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favour? That is accepted. The second apology is from Councillor Patterson, who is taking some medical leave. Can I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Wilkinson. All in favour? And that is carried. Moving on to item 2, leaves of absence. I'm not aware of any requests for leaves of absence. Item 3, confirmation of our previous minutes. The minutes of 8:59 Water, Waste and Energy Committee meeting held on the 9th of September are to be confirmed. Do I have a mover for that motion? Thanks, Councillor Young. Seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All in favour? And that is carried. Item 4 is our conflict of interest declaration. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest to declare about any of the items in today's agenda? No. Moving on to item 5, committee forward planning schedule. So currently the forward planning schedule at 5.1, the Water and Sewerage Services monthly financial report at 6.2 and 6.3, the Waste Management Services monthly financial report are all starred. Is there a request to have any of those unstarred? I'm looking at Councillor Young.
A question about the forward schedule. Thanks, Chair.
Sure. So we'll unstar 5.1. 6.2 and 6.3 remain starred. Can I have a mover for those? Thanks, Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favour? And that is carried. So moving back to the item 5 committee forward planning schedule, I will throw to Councillor Young for a question.
Thanks, Chair. I just noticed that there's an item to be done in December. It was scheduled for meeting number around 8:60, and now it's been pushed back to 8:62. It deals with the Waste and Recycling Centre operational charges. I just wondered why that's been pushed back.
I'll just see if I can see Chris Owens donning a coat, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer that question for you.
Is that where ours is going to be resolved towards?
Morning, Chris.
No, it's charges.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors. Councillor, I believe the question was why we were moving the Waste Recycling Centre network plan back to December from November?
No, specifically, it's Waste and Recycling Centre operational charges. It's been moved.
Changes.
Oh, changes. Well, that would explain.
And we should know what that's about.
I move that we just remove that from the list altogether. No, it's explained now. Okay. I thought it was charges, it's changes.
You didn't even need to open your mouth, Chris. You got it sorted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't. Thanks, Councillor Doran.
It just was one of the things I was going to raise, which highlighted by Councillor Young, was that in some of the 4 planning schedules we get as an attachment, this one's been sort of scrunched onto the page and it's quite blurry when you look at it. And I'm just wondering if in the future we could have that either as an attachment or not so blurry. So, sorry. Thanks.
Thank you. That request is noted. Okay, so that wraps up questions for the forward planning schedule, unless there's any further from the floor.
Yeah, I'll ask one question then. So,
sure.
Chris, you might want to hear this.
Sorry.
Is there to be an item about charges for waste centres?
Chris is getting his steps up this morning.
Thanks.
Sorry.
That's right.
To you, Madam Chair. That item is effectively an update based on the Merrill Minute when we came to you earlier in the year with the Waste and Recycling Centre Network Plan.
Yep.
You'll recall that we spoke about that included gate fees, and it also included changes to the WRC network, so individual waste and recycling centres, the services offered, and the potential for closure. So that will really be an update. So we were instructed to go back and look at the network again and come back to council with some further recommendations after we've done some further research and some further consultation. We hadn't contemplated that we'd be talking about gate fees at that one. It was to be, in my understanding of what was requested, was that it was really about the changes to the network. Because council determined or resolved that we would apply that $5 gate fee at our non-residential or residential WRCs from 1st of July 2026. But in terms of physical changes or changes to the facilities themselves, we were told to come back with a more refined plan.
Thanks, Chris. So, through you, Chair, my recollection was that we notionally adopted the gate fees at the WRCs to be implemented from and to be adopted from next year, but I didn't think it was a firm decision. I thought it was going to be subject to some further scrutiny.
Through you, Madam Chair, my understanding was that it was a resolution that we would proceed down that direction. However, I recognise that all fees and charges are resolved through Special Budget Committee. So I assume that we would be either confirming or otherwise that as part of the 26-27 budget deliberations. But we are moving ahead on the understanding that that direction has been approved. It involves physical changes to the WRCs, staff changes, IT changes. So there is a body of work that's happening so that we can be ready on day one, because it does take, there's a portfolio of works. It's far more than just charging at that gate. So there's a body of work underway.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Councillor Castro.
I think it's definitely going ahead, because I was at the Merrimack transfer station yesterday, the green pad. And there's was it yesterday, Sunday, and there's a sign up which says that the charges are coming in 2026. So there's a big sign there. So I think
signs can be taken down.
So it's definitely happening.
Would you like the officers to circulate some clarification of where it currently sits, or would you like it discussed
No, I'd like the council to have another opportunity to review that decision. Okay. In the light of other things. For example, we're going to be dealing with the blue bags today, and there may be decisions that we make about that influence our decision ultimately, or our capacity to review the decision that was made about the gate fees at WRCs.
Okay. We could probably have a conversation offline of a forum, perhaps through the budget workshops that are occurring between now and the next budget, of the best opportunity to sort of flesh that out, if you'd like. Yeah,
that'll be fine. I'll just give Chris an alert that we might want to visit that when we deal with that item in December. Thanks.
Councillor Young, any further questions from the floor? I'll just bring councillors' attention to the fact that there is only one item in the forward planning schedule for our next committee meeting, and I've just had a chat to Kathy Baker, and whether or not that one can be brought to committee is still dependent on the status of that business being established. So just putting it out there that I'll work with the AGMs to find out whether a wastewater and energy committee meeting is required for next round, and get that out to you as soon as possible. If there's no further questions on the forward planning schedule, I'll seek a mover. Thanks, Councillor Wilkinson. Seconded by Councillor Castro. All those in favour? And that motion is carried. Okay, we now move on to the first presentation of today's committee meeting, which is item 6.1, the Calibrated Modelling to Inform Sewerage Network Planning, and that's going to be presented by Catherine Waterhouse. Thanks, Catherine, and welcome, Mark.
It's pretty sensitive. Okay, cool, thank you. Okay, so as introduced, today I'd like to talk about calibrated models. So for decades now, engineers have been using computerised hydraulic models to design sewerage systems. Council are moving to calibrated models, a more modern planning approach because that offers us better understanding of how the sewerage system is performing. This drives three main benefits. It drives better investment decisions, better environmental outcomes, and in turn, better community outcomes. Through the agenda today, we'll be talking about, Sewerage 101, the basics of a sewerage system, how the city's sewerage system works at a high level, and we'll be talking more about calibrated models and how does this help us drive better investment. We're going to be exploring how the pilot trial, the results of that, and the future use of calibrated models for council. So this diagram represents a simplified sewerage system. The purpose of a sewerage system is to effectively convey sewage or wastewater from the house through to the sewage treatment plant. Where possible, designers like to use gravity systems for a number of reasons to rising mains, which is the other option. Gravity systems offer improved cost benefits. They're less expensive to operate over time. They have less wear and tear, and they have less outages in power outages. We can't always use gravity systems though, and part of this will be because of the topography and because we're connecting into an existing network that goes to the sewage treatment plant. In the Gold Coast, we have a very extensive sewage system, much more complex than the previous slide. So I think previously in a speech I mentioned that if we laid our water, wastewater and stormwater assets out line to line, they would reach all the way from the Gold Coast to Los Angeles almost. If we're just considering our sewage system, they would get past Fiji from the Gold Coast. So it's still extensive. We have a large number of pump stations, a large number of sewer rising mains associated with those pump stations because we have a lot of flat land in the Gold Coast. As I said before, where possible, we probably would have tried to avoid those. In council, we are currently investing quite extensively in our very modern sewage treatment plants, which don't release locally, they release at the seaway associated with the tide. When we get to a complex city sewerage system, it becomes very complex to analyse and understand what's occurring. This is where calibrated modelling really can help us understand how the system is performing. To give you an analogy, if you had a heart murmur, for example, you might go to a cardiologist who might put some instruments on you and then ask you to run on a treadmill because the cardiologist would be wanting to understand how did your heart perform under pressure. The engineers are taking the same approach with a calibrated model. The calibrated model requires us to put instruments, so flow meters and pressure sensors, on key points of our sewerage system so we can understand how it performs under pressure. For a sewerage system, the idea of a pressurized scenario is when wet weather occurs. Under wet weather, the flows will be much higher. So while sewerage systems are designed to effectively communicate or convey the sewage from the houses to the treatment plant, inflow and infiltration happens. It's not a perfect system. The engineers know this and they designed for it. The two things that will swell the flow in a sewage system relating to wet weather in particular are inflow and infiltration. The diagram on the left is showing a couple of sources of inflow. So they can be from illegal connections where people's roof water is being directed towards the sewage system. It can also have inflow from damaged manhole lids, for example, or from overflow relief gullies that are in too low a location. Infiltration more tends to relate to cracks that might be in the pipes, either private or public pipes. The small graph on the right there shows how a sewerage system can respond to wet weather. So At the bottom, you can see that there's a fairly regular diurnal pattern that occurs from normal dry weather. The rainfall, which is shown are the kind of stalactite things at the top there of the graph. The sewage system will respond to that rainfall by a sudden peak of flows. This is where overflows are more likely to happen. As I mentioned before, the designers actually allow for inflow and infiltration, so they tend to allow for 5 times the average dry weather flow. When we start getting exceedances of that measure, that's when the overflows can occur. In the Gold Coast, as per most of Australia, well, of the whole of Australia, we go through separate sewage systems. So our stormwater systems and our sewers are designed to be separate. This means that while some overflows can occur, particularly with extreme weather, they're much less typically than in other countries, including Western countries such as England, parts of the States, and France. When we use, as I mentioned before, the design of sewage systems typically allows that we've got 5 times that average dry weather flow. However, when we get to legitimately challenge that assumption by instead using measured flows through the calibrated models, it helps us drive better investment decisions. You can see the pathways highlighted on this slide. We don't need to use 5 times average dry weather flow when we can prove that the sewer system is working more effectively than that. It is a process to get from the hydraulic analysis through to the actual investment decision, which is the other reason presenting this slide. From the hydraulic analysis, it leads us to investigate which options might be helpful for solving the issue, which leads to concept design and detailed design. So that process can take years, but ultimately it should lead to better investment decisions. The small snip at the bottom of this slide, by the way, helps show what a model, hydraulic model, typically looks like. You can see overlaid on the background of the city, there are a number of nodes, and the diagram at the bottom shows the grade of a sewage pipeline over varied topography. So, whereas the traditional approach, and by that I mean it's still fairly modern, it's still a computerized hydraulic approach, typically that would be assuming the sewage flows would be assumed based on general capita load, so estimating what the population is, what the flow is associated with that population, allowing a factor for inflow and infiltration from rainfall events, and it has a nominal assumption which it applies throughout the network. Our chosen new approach actually uses real flow loading data that is measured in the system that helps anchor that whole system so we can have real insight into exactly how the system is performing. This gives us the opportunity to have better operational insights and know more precisely where the overflow incidences are occurring, and leads to better detective work as to what's causing them, allowing us to address those issues. It's very much focused on network performance, real network performance rather than theoretical values. At the moment, we're very excited that we've just recently delivered the Coombaba calibrated model. So this is our biggest catchment in the Gold Coast. It's very exciting. We've been building on work that have been occurring for the last few years. So initially there was a pilot trial at Broadbeach, which was very successful. And then we have been successively planning and rolling out where these pressure sensors and flow meters will go to give us the best benefit. We intend to carry on the work through future catchments. The initial results of that Broadbeach pilot study was that we managed to reduce what would have been projected in the LGIP from 2019 as a $50 million investment to $4 million. So that's obviously very significant. This is maintaining the levels of service that is required, so it's very promising. This is not to say that calibrated modelling will always allow us to achieve that level of investment, which would be impressive indeed. But what it is letting us do is to make sure we understand exactly how our sewer system is performing, so we can understand that with future population projections, we have better confidence about how it will perform under those conditions. So we're doing the right investment at the right time in the right place. What we've seen from the calibrated modelling we've done to date is that the coastal strip is actually performing really well, so better than expected from the theoretical standards. The wet weather response there is minimal and it has spare capacity for growth. However, in the inland areas, especially where there are residential properties, there is a much higher wet weather response. This, as I mentioned before, will lead to potential savings and deferrals for the community. And it's also likely that the sewerage investment that is required might be different from what's reflected in LGIP currently. Further details on some of the findings we've had to date is that Helensvale has quite significant overflows, or more than would have been theoretically expected, and this seems to be in response to high levels of inflow and infiltration. Burleigh has comparatively low overflows with one troublesome location, and Coombabah catchment, that very large catchment I mentioned before, most of the overflows are driven by the east-west force main and capacity issues with that infrastructure. The various graphs on the right of the slide, by the way, show how different areas, whether they're industrial or residential, is responding to the wet weather. And we can see that the residential areas certainly seem to be at higher risk of inflow and infiltration. This assessment is guiding us in our next steps as to what we do. So Helensvale, we are already investing in infrastructure upgrades at a couple of our pump stations called OX38 and OX39. Those projects are already with delivery to fast track and improve that infrastructure. We're also going to be looking at more targeted investigations of inflow and infiltration at Helensvale and Southport on the back of this analysis. Coombabah, as we mentioned, it seems to be some issues with the east and western force main, which is our most substantial sewer rising main, and we are looking earnestly into the development of an east and western force main longer term solution, which we aim to be presenting to Chambers early next year. Currently, we're developing options for that and looking at shortlisting very soon. As I mentioned before, we are starting to look at inflow and infiltration in earnest. This is basically, I suppose, a non-infrastructure solution to how we can improve things. Again, cost-effectively improving the performance of our sewerage system. The way we'll go about this is typically we use a smoke testing. And if there is an illegal connection, so as shown by that diagram on the right, that might be, for example, collecting roof water from houses. You can see this through a smoke test because the smoke ends up coming out of the wrong place, as opposed to the terminal vent, for example. We have started doing this in one small trial area in Merrimack, and so we're interested to see how that goes. That's an industrial application, but as I say, it seems to be that the findings to date would suggest there would be benefits for starting to look at some of the residential areas and seeing if there are some illegal connections that are going on there that should be corrected, again, so the community system performs better. In conclusion, as I've demonstrated, understanding the current and future performance of the sewerage networks and its risks associated with it is benefited by using calibrated models. This will lead Council to investigate infrastructure and non-infrastructure solutions that will help drive effective investment decision making. This will lead to better environmental outcomes and improved community outcomes.
Thank you, Catherine. Do we have any questions from councillors? I've got Councillor Young first.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Catherine. So my understanding basically is we've got about 400 kilometres of sewer pipes where we're pushing sewer uphill, which is just an enormous load on the system and electricity and so forth. Now, these infiltration tests that you mentioned aren't new. We've been doing those for a long time. Is there a rolling program of that? I mean, you've introduced that as if it's a new thing, but I know we've done that in the past in other suburbs.
You're entirely right. Smoke testing is not a new thing. Council has done it before. The new thing is the calibrated modelling, which will allow us to do, say, the detective work a little earlier, sorry, through the chair, about where to target those investigations. So we're using modern technology to help narrow down the scope of those smoke testing results. So yes, that is the plan, and this will give us a targeted approach for informing the program.
Thank you. And we've discussed OX 38 and 39 in the budget committee or workshop the other day. Can you explain what work will be done? I mean, you're increasing the capacity of those pump stations. So that's just, explain, thanks.
Sure. Sorry, I don't have through the chair. Sorry, I don't have those slides with me at the moment, but that project is partly driven by growth in that we're moving sewage from one catchment to another. It has a number of improvements with it. It will help with overflows that are occurring, but it's one of those projects that has multiple benefits. It's also going to be helping with, among other things, access for maintenance and the condition of some of those pumps, as well as helping us address what might have been an issue for helping us plan for resilience of our pump stations in particular.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Through the Chair, I might just add too that typically about 50% of infiltration issues are not related to illegal connections. So within our own network, there will be infiltration from groundwater. And if you look at our coastal regions, obviously tidal influence. The team can actually see the tidal impacts on the telemetry. So as well as obviously making sure that we manage private connections or illegal connections well, we also, through some of this better intelligence on our network, we can look at locations where we're potentially getting groundwater inflows into our own network and then target and take action to I guess, reduce that, because that can be quite significant.
Yeah, I live adjacent to Saltwater Creek at Oxenford, and when there's a big deluge, you can just smell the sewage in the creek. It's happens very quickly. It's very distressing.
Catherine, would you mind if I asked, and I feel like the answer is going to be it depends, but how long do these calibrated models last? So once we've gone in, we've done that work, and so, for example, next is Helensvale and Pimpama, how long can we expect that calibration to remain relevant for?
And through the chair, great question, thanks. So you're right, things can change over time in the system and it can perform differently. So we're establishing these models, but typically it would be recommended that we end up revisiting them every few years afterwards. It takes a little bit of time to establish the model because what we're trying to do is, I suppose, wait for the rainfall to occur and we can see how the sewage system responds. So typically we're wanting to see how it performs for at least 6 months before we start checking the performance of the calibrated model, which leads to the working out where the most pertinent issues are to address and the options, etc. But yes, the model itself should be refreshed every few years.
Councillor Doran, then Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Catherine, I think it was you who presented to us, might have been end of last year, about the pipe and sewer network generally, the condition assessment. Was that you?
Through the chair, yes, you're right.
I remember walking away from that a little bit concerned about the maintenance costs moving forward. There was a full presentation of the assessment that was known at the time, this calibrated model has achieved significant savings essentially in one particular area, and you did caveat to say don't expect this across the network, but has this informed any further considerations of your views as to the maintenance costs on our network moving forward more generally?
Through the chair, as I mentioned, the calibrated modelling will help us identify target areas for inflow and infiltration. So infiltration can be an issue with the integrity of the pipe at times, so that might lead to maintenance. On the whole, it is about informing our planning decisions. So one of the things that Council is very much driving is that we have a very integrated approach to asset management and planning. Again, another initiative that the Council is using to make sure the community is getting the best outcome for the best bang for their buck. So where we can, like the OX 38 and 39 example, we'll be not just addressing planning outcomes, but also trying to work where we need to for asset renewal.
Will there be another report in the future based on learnings from the calibrated model that informs us further as to the conditions of our underground services?
Through the chair, as I mentioned before, the next cab off the rank as far as presentations is the East-West Force Main,
Yep.
which is very much capturing the findings from the calibrated modelling and working out our investment strategy for what is our most significant sewer rising main asset. That is very significant investment, so certainly something that Council has determined should be brought forward as a presentation. We'll be developing our inflow and infiltration program as we get more information gradually, and that obviously also goes into our investment profile. Does that answer your question?
I can see someone wants to chime in with further information.
Through the chair, look, we need to keep two things sometimes overlap, sometimes don't. So we can have condition assessment that we're doing on our critical assets, which would lead us to need to replace an asset. So just based on condition, the asset needs to be upgraded or renewed, or we can have a growth pressure where we can't renew like for like. We need to go to cater for growth. Sometimes they intersect and you actually fix both problems at once. Sometimes they're quite separate and would be one or the other driving it. So the condition assessment program we've talked about previously was a lot around our critical assets, making sure that we understand the condition of our critical assets. The calibrated model is more as we've got growth in the city, do we have the capacity to take all of that growth? Obviously, if we need to put in new pipelines because of that growth, we'll have them and they'll be brand new and they'll be in good condition. So there is obviously a benefit to that, but the two need to be thought of a little bit separately, knowing that sometimes they intersect, but sometimes you've got stuff that you do just for condition assessment and stuff that you just do to service growth.
Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Catherine. Appreciate all you've done in this modelling. I think it's incredible, and our network is vast, no doubt about that. A couple of times just in today's presentation, you've used the word corrections, and it's mostly in line with inflow and residential property, I would assume, in that respect. I don't know if it would be part of a future paper once the calibrated model is continued out and we've finalised that perhaps, but just in relation to how do we go about those corrections, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask. Is this going to be a city initiative? Is it going to be residentials? Is it going to be pulling plumbers back in to fix past work? Or is that, like I said, am I preempting something that would come potentially in a future report?
Yeah, if you want.
Through the chair, I expect, depending on the location of the defect, like as Michael pointed out, a lot of the defects can actually be on the city network. So obviously, where there's a defect on the city network, the expectation would be the city would pay. If it was a defect to private plumbing, then we would be the most likely path. We would be trying to issue a defect under the through the plumbing defects, and have the resident would be responsible for rectifying that defect. And I suppose it needs to be thought of, and there was a good example in the presentation that Catherine gave. The size of a lot of the sewer network is 150 mil, so this big. If you've got a downpipe directly connected to that, you are taking most of the capacity of that
from that one illegal connection. So that one illegal connection can actually cause the whole sewer system in that local area to fail. So if that's the case, then we need to get those fixed.
Are there any further questions before I move the item? So I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Wilkinson. I'm just going to open by thanking Catherine for an incredibly well-written report.
Thank you.
I obviously our sewerage network is an incredibly sophisticated piece of infrastructure, but actually found the report not only really valuable for understanding the calibrated model and its benefits, but for understanding the strengths and weaknesses and risks that exist in our network more broadly. And I just think you just did a really good job of compiling that for a level of people that aren't hydrologists and sewage network experts. So thank you very much for your efforts. Is there anybody that wants to speak against the item today? Okay, thanks. Well then, with that, I'll close by saying that the city is using new technologies that include calibrated modelling to effectively develop a digital twin of our sewage network. This modelling enables us to see how the sewage system performs under different real-world conditions, such as wet weather. This technology will support a well-targeted capital works program, targeting investment when and where it needs to be most, and hopefully that creates efficiencies in our maintenance programs. I think officers very much for their presentations. With that, I'll take the vote. All those in favour? And that recommendation is carried. Thanks, officers. We're moving on to a closed session report, but before we go into close, I would just like to take the opportunity to formally welcome our brand new EGM for Environment, Heritage and Resilience, Mr. Brett Brogan, for his very first committee meeting after commencing the role yesterday. Brett joins the city with an exceptionally impressive background and an experience with both state and local governments, including a number of key leadership appointments with other local council and state government departments. I'm certain your impressive and highly relevant experience will bring a great deal of value to the city, and we warmly welcome you here this morning. So we are commencing with a closed report, which is 7.1, the bulky curbside waste collection service update. And due to this item, is there a presentation, Chris, before I go into close?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, there's no presentation,
Okay.
but obviously we're happy to answer any questions.
I think this will be extremely difficult to do without being closed, so I'm going to make the move that we move into close to discuss commercial matters. That is seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favour? And that is carried. Carried. So live streaming back on. Thank you for those joining us from home. We just spent some time discussing a closed session item 7.1, the bulky curbside waste collection service update. I am going to move the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Shock horror, I don't have a seconder, so we will move to a foreshadowed motion that has been put forward by Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. So if I get a second, I'll speak to it.
Do we have a seconder for the foreshadowed motion? Thank you, Councillor Doran. Thanks, Councillor Young. Would
Thanks,
you like to
Chair.
open debate?
So there's obviously been a lot of debate. We recognise the importance of this service. It is a great service. It's appreciated by many in the community. So the objective here is to firstly refer this to the special budget review process, which is going to be conducted in November at the GAF committee on the 18th November. And so the recommendation is that that committee would consider continuing the funding for the program favourably. So there's a deliberate intent there to ask for their favourable consideration of the continued funding for the remainder of this financial year. So there's no interruption to the service. And then second part, which is number 3 there, is that the council would give further consideration to the continuation of the scheme as part of its 26-27 budget deliberations. Leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Would anybody like to speak against the foreshadowed motion? No, and I'll defer to Councillor Young to close.
Happy to leave it at that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Okay, with that, I will take the vote. All those in favour? And that recommendation is carried. Oh, Chris, you're hanging around, I believe. Thank you, officers. So we will move on to our second closed presentation, item 7.2, which I note is also required to occur in closed session due to it containing contractual details. I'm presuming you're moving us into closed, Councillor Doran? Yep, and seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favour? That is carried. And I've just returned from a discussion regarding closed item 7.2. I understand that one is going to be moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Cashra. Would you like to open debate, Councillor Wilkinson?
Thank you, Chair, and I'll keep it brief given that we have been in close. Look, we've just had a lengthy discussion around our significant contract update through our resource recovery services. I'd like to thank the city officers for their critical work in part of this. It's been a big journey, and it's going to continue to be, something that we continue to move forward on in future years. Also, thanking obviously all those partners that we are involved with as well. I think it's important that we acknowledge that this is something that is much larger than just us solely, and we look forward to continuing relationships in that regard. But all in all, we note the status of the progress of this particular report, and thank officers for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Would anybody like to speak against the recommendation? No. Will I take that as your close? Thank you. And with that, we'll take the vote. All those in favour? And that is carried. That brings us to the end of our meeting today. Item 8, general business. I don't believe we have a general business item for today. So with that, we will close the meeting at 11:28. Thank you, everyone, for their attendance and involvement. Thank you, officers, and welcome again, Brett. You survived.